Hello everyone, I'm Extra Cheesy 87 and this is LP Reflections for Trails of Cold Steel. This video's been a little bit delayed because I'm a procrastinator. I kind of meant to get this video out a bit sooner, but better late than never, as I always say. Now I would like to try and keep this under an hour, so we'll probably just kind of go ahead and get started on the talkie talks. Background footage probably just gonna be stuff from the LP, like maybe a couple boss fights. I don't have any of the raw footage anymore, so it'll probably be ripped from YouTube, which you know, might result in some quality loss. If you're wondering why it looks like garbage, that's why. So as for the LP itself, we're going to kind of start off, or the video itself, we're going to kind of start off with a little bit of talking about my mind state going into the video. Then we'll briefly talk about each of the chapters, general thoughts on each one, things that I thought were cool or interesting or worth mentioning. And then also I really want to talk about the difficulty mod a little bit in detail, and about like how I thought that added to the overall playthrough. And then at the end we'll talk a little bit about the CS2 LP, which should be starting a few days after this goes up. I haven't started recording it yet because I wanted this video to go out before I started recording. But yeah. So overall, my mind state going into the Cold Steel Let's Play, so we started it basically as soon as we finished Azure. So there was about I think about a week and a half gap real time, but I think like video wise it was like Azure finale, Azure LP reflections, and then like the next day was Cold Steel 1. So very little gap there between the start of, or the continuation of the LPs or the Trail series there. I did have somewhat lowered expectations for both the LP, or well, the LP's performance and the game itself. Partially for the game side of it, I just, you know, it's the start of a new kind of arc, so to speak. Of course, you're probably going to expect it to be a bit, like not quite as good as, I mean, Azure is kind of considered to be like, you know, probably the overall favorite, it seems to be among like the hardcore fans, or at the very least, you know, it's like top 1 or top 2. For most people, and I agree, it's my second favorite. I still slightly prefer Trails 2, but it's very close. And as for the LP itself, I just kind of like, I mean, I know the CS games are more popular, but they've also like been more available for longer, so there's more like actual playthroughs of them done already, but it definitely did a lot better than I expected. The Cold Steel 1 Let's Play is already the most successful Trails LP, which is a very oh god, excuse me, which is very cool. Did I get water before I started this long video? I got a little bit, not enough. You know, spend all this time planning the video, and then in the moment you're like, I forgot something super important. But we'll just roll with it. But yeah, I think part of the reason why, because even Azure, like it did better than Azure, and Azure even had the extra boost of being timed with the release of the Geofront patch, which I think part of the reason why Cold Steel did better is that the first video of CS is just straight up a lot better than the first video of Azure. Unfortunately, just due to the timing of the release of the translation patch for Azure, it was like on a Saturday evening, and normally I don't really record on the weekends because I'm not alone, and so those first few videos were a little awkward because I wasn't recording them like while I was alone, so I guess I just like felt I was a bit more reserved than I would normally be. Whereas I think for Cold Steel, I think that first video is just, it's good. It's got like, you know, a few good jokes right from the start. Overall, the game itself just starts off a bit faster and everything. But overall, I think that's maybe helped that LP be a lot more successful than the previous ones. And then also in terms of like having lowered expectations for the game, I'm not really like super aware of like discourse and internet fandom because I don't really like participate in that stuff, but I do know there's a bit of a divide in the community over the pre and post Cold Steel games, where the Cold Steel games are definitely the most popular, but there's also kind of a bit of back and forth over whether they're good or not, and I don't really, you know, pay attention to all that, but I am aware of it, that some of the more hardcore fans of the older games don't really like the Cold Steel stuff that much, or at least the first two. Because I guess it's like, and to a degree I can kind of understand it, because Cold Steel 1 does seem to go a lot more like traditional anime stuff. Like there's a lot more like common tropes and whatnot. Overall, I think the game handles it well for the most part. I mean, there's definitely stuff that annoyed me. You know, the overall the horniness mainly, which I mean, really, that's a lot of that's more like for comedic effect, right? Because I think it's more interesting to kind of play at this character of someone who like is like visibly annoyed by the horniness rather than just, you know, being silent. I just think it's more interesting that way. It's a kind of something to talk about, or a unique aspect to the playthrough. So it's a lot of that is played up, because I mean, it's not like, I mean, I've played anime stuff that's way more horny when I was younger. Back in the visual novel days of weebdom, but you know, I kind of grew out of that a little. Well, grew out's not really the right word. I just haven't read a visual novel outside of a Let's Play in like a very long time. But yeah. Also, one of the things that was really interesting about the Let's Play is starting it with the difficulty. My God, this is like taking way longer than I thought it would. We're only like halfway through the first page of my notes. So starting with the difficulty mod with some of the notes, though, I was really excited about doing with, because especially after Azure being a bit of a disappointment combat wise, just because the game is like so easy on Nightmare, unless you, because like I even ignored some of the mechanics, and it's still just like, I don't know, it's like you have to like go in and completely ignore like half of the mechanics in the game to make it hard, which sucks, because it's like that's not really that fun either, because then you're so limited in what you have available to you that it's almost becomes like a little boring when you have this like super expansive combat system, and you can only use like, you know, half of the abilities because half of them are just like broken as hell. And then plus Azure is very much balanced around the idea that every boss has an attack that can one-shot you, and there's not really any ways to play around that in Azure besides just basically like Tio ult or Adamantine Shield. And I opted to just use Tio's ultimate because Adamantine Shield is broken. So, yeah, just overall, Azure was a bit of a disappointment in that regard, because combat just kind of got like a little boring, because you really only ever had to worry about the AoE S breaks. Nothing else could really kill you. I think I died like 5 times in the entire LP, and it was like once was to Lynn and Aeolia, and then I died twice to Noelle because I was being dumb and rushed through the fight because it was kind of boring. And then I died once to the Cryptid with the AoE magic attack because I didn't know he was casting a spell and didn't think to cancel his craft. And then I think we died once in like the final dungeon to the Chimera, because once again it just like we got a bad turn order and I got one shot by an AoE spell. But yeah, so I was excited to start that with the difficulty mod, and overall, I mean, I really enjoyed the difficulty mod. Even, I mean, there's like a couple minor issues here and there, but I still think I enjoyed it way more than I would have. Well, I know I enjoyed it way more than I would have with regular Nightmare, because I have played a little bit of the game on base level Nightmare, and it's not nearly as enjoyable. But I'll talk about that more when we get to the final chapter. I also approached the game with a bit more of a completionist mindset in terms of talking to every NPC. In Azure, I mostly talked to every NPC. There was like occasionally times where like we didn't talk to like non-named characters, or like, you know, characters that don't show up every single time. Because every like story section one day you have like a couple, you know, just kind of generic NPC characters that maybe wouldn't be talked to. But for the most part, we did that in Azure, but we were much more thorough in Cold Steel. I mean, I'm sure I missed like occasional lines of dialogue, but definitely more thorough in that regard. You know, we got to see every single quest. There's only one quest I actually missed per se. I mean, we still did it on screen, but the Anton quest, I missed at first, but I just happened to kind of on a whim look up and see if there was any hidden quests in Chapter 2 and saw that one right before we got past the point of no return. I think that's pretty much it for the intro, and now we're going to start going to talk about each individual chapter. Most of these I don't have too much to say, aside from like, you know, the final chapter I have a lot to talk about, but for the most part, each chapter I feel like I talked about enough in the actual Let's Play, so we're not going to try and go into too much detail. But the prologue in Chapter 1, I think they do a pretty good job of setting the tone and the pace of the game, where like your whole like first conflict, right, in Celtic and everything is like, it's minor, you know, you kind of like stop basically a theft of some stuff, but it does feel like, you know, you do something important kind of for the town and everything, and you kind of have your first big objective, and there's also hints of a bigger conspiracy, right, with the setting up the conflict between the provisional nobles and the like the actual government, plus the Imperial Liberation Front stuff that you see at the end of the chapter. Combat during the prologue and chapter 1, like, just instantly grabbed me with the difficulty mod installed. Because, like, I mean, those initial fight, I mean, even just that very first fight with the beetles, right? I mean, I was fighting for my freaking life, and it was so damn fun, man. I mean, I was like, I had more fun with the beetle fight than I did in anything in Azure. And that was, like, the literal second or first fight in the entire game. Just like every fight was like extremely razor thin, and you had to have like a specific strategy for everything, which just, it felt so cool and fun and such a nice change of pace. Because I mean, really, the games have been fairly easy ever since Trails 3. And even Trails 1 and 2 probably aren't that bad if you've played them before, but it's just, you know, general not understanding the mechanics per se in those Let's Plays, just due to them being, well, Trails 1 technically wasn't completely blind, only the last like chapter of it was blind, but I kind of underestimated the game's difficulty in that initial Let's Play, because I think when I originally played the game, I played on just regular normal, and I thought I'd played on hard or something. I can't remember, but or was that I played on hard, but I had the retry offset feature on without knowing it, and that made the game seem way easier than it actually was. So in the actual Let's Play, I'm like, I remember this game being easy as shit. I don't need to like learn the mechanics. So yeah, it definitely was nice to return to the struggle, because I mean, I do really enjoy the combat in these games, but I think they have like kind of poor balance decisions at times, which can kind of undermine how good the combat is on a mechanical sense. And like the way that all kind of culminated also in chapter 1 with us beating the first boss, or the final chapter boss in the first try, felt really cool. Kind of going from that, like, you know, we're struggling to beat beetles, to like, hey, I actually kind of was able to beat the first major boss of the game, like on the first try, and it wasn't like that bad, even though we did get some good luck. I remember, like, I think we got hit at one point, we didn't get fainted or something like that. I remember we got some good RNG at the start of that fight. But another thing that kind of the chapter 1 sets the tone of that's really cool is the idea of having the set location of Trista, but also allowing you to have like new places to explore every chapter is cool. Kind of like a best of both worlds of, you know, what made the Crossbow game so good, and also with like the original Trails 1 and 2, for having this, you know, new areas to explore, but also you have that centralized location like you did in Crossbow, where you kind of, you know, talk to the same NPCs over and over again. You kind of have a bit more of an attachment to them because you talk to them over and over again, as opposed to just, you know, a few times in one chapter of the game and then you don't talk to them again until like maybe the sequel, which is kind of the way like Trails 1 and 2 did it. I think that's pretty much it for chapter 1. You know, good job setting up the noble and reformist faction conflict, especially for new players who aren't, you know, familiar with that being the spark, or so to speak, of like the main overall conflict with Erebonia. You know, that's very clearly been referenced throughout Trails 2 and 3 and 0 and Azure, but like a lot of people did play Cold Steel for the first, or as their first entry into the series, because it was like the first game that was like kind of wildly available, right? Then also it being 3D, I think helps capture people compared to, you know, the more like isometric viewpoint 2D sprites of the previous games. Chapter 2, not too much to say about it. It introduces the concept of how you're going to have different party members for each field study, which is a really good idea. It's a nice way to balance this large party you have, which is a problem that a lot of RPGs run into when you have like a big, huge party, where you either kind of have to accept that canonically all the party members are with you at all times, but half of them just kind of like stand around and do nothing, or you run into these situations where people just kind of like use their favorites and will sometimes just completely ignore certain party members. So I do like that they kind of force you to use characters in a way, because like a lot of times you won't know if you like a character until you're forced to use them. And it also I think there's a lot to be said for the way like combat can reinforce characterization or make you like characters. Like for example, Elliot is G, mainly because of his combat performances, and it made me appreciate his like actual character more because you learn to depend on him so much in combat. Another example of that in like Trails in the Sky would be Oliver. Like Oliver is one of the strongest characters in the series, which makes which made me like him a lot more personality wise, because I'm like, yeah, maybe he's a weirdo at times, but he's also the best character, and he's the only reason we're able to beat some of these bosses. So that's a good idea in terms of like kind of having like it makes everyone feel important, I guess, as opposed to just if I was just able to pick 4 party members the entire game, you would kind of sometimes just gravitate towards picking the same characters over and over again. So the forced variety is nice. It also keeps combat interesting because you don't just have like the same options available for every single chapter. It was also nice to see a new city in the Trail series for the first time in a long time in Breahard. Because really, I mean, really the only 2 cities you'd seen up to that point in the Trails games are like Gransel and Crawlspell. I mean, there's Ruan and Zeiss are kind of cities, but they're on a lot smaller scale in Trails 1 and 2. For the most part, you don't really encounter that many series in the game, or I mean cities in the game, just because, well, the budget and scale issues and stuff like that. But another thing that Chapter 2 does really well is, setting up the noble conflict some more. That also has some really good character moments for Eustace mainly. He gets the first like real heart-to-heart scene between him and Reem, but also some stuff with Machias. Because Chapter 2 has that whole thing where Machias like is mad at Reem because he feels like he's lied to him about him being a noble and everything, and then plus Machias, kind of overhearing that Eustace isn't like he's like a half noble basically, where he wasn't raised as a noble and only in recent years has been taken in by the noble side of his family. Chapter 3, really great change of scenery. The music and the vibe for the Highlands is just awesome. It felt really cool to go to a location that felt like truly new, and like it's also the first like open area in the series. And while it's lacking in some regards, I mean, it is very empty at the end of the day. There's not really much to do in the Highlands. It's still very cool. It kind of has like a big like Hyrule field from like Ocarina of Time energy, where there's not really anything to do in the field, but it's definitely still cool riding around on the horse with the awesome Nord Highlands music in the background. But also story-wise, it represents like the first big achievement for the squad, stopping the or capturing the terrorists in time to prevent any conflict from breaking out. And it kind of has this nice balance between it feels like you accomplished something really important, but at the same time it's more of a situation where it's not that it's something that only Class 7 could have done. They just happen to be in the right place at the right time, because like at the end of the day, all you really did is you beat up a few terrorists and fight a big spider. So it's not like you feel like you've accomplished something too big too early, but you also do feel like you've played a role in the story, and that like your actions have meaning, which is a problem I had in Azura for the first like 4 chapters of that game, where nothing you did really mattered. Chapter 4, that introduces the idea of Reen having a special power, which is, I mean, it's definitely like a big overused trope, but by God, I do kind of like it, if I'm being honest. I don't know, I just think it's cool. You also get the first hint about the old schoolhouse and, well, like what its purpose is, which is interesting. It kind of adds a little bit of extra mystery to the area. In terms of like the field study and everything, Heimdall is cool. It's a really fun location, and while it's not necessarily like that large in actuality, the high amount of NPC dialogue, if you're trying to do all the talking, does really make the area feel a lot bigger, and it feels kind of like a capital city, which is nice. It's similar in the way Crawlspell, where Crawlspell, gameplay-wise, only has like a few districts and, maybe 80 or so NPCs max, maybe not even that many, maybe like 50 in the actual city proper, but it feels really big because all those NPCs have something important to say. You also have a lot of good character development in Chapter 4. You have Elliot's backstory with his mom and everything, Machias' backstory with his cousin. Machias' scene in particular is very good, but also you have Fee and Laura have their whole thing together with their duel. You learn Fee's backstory in full, and I also really like just the idea that the conflict between Fia and Laura existed in the first place. That's something that I thought the game did kind of a good job of in terms of, like, you know, like, even just Machias being mad at Reen for, like, all of Chapter 2 is kind of cool. Like, the idea that it made the characters feel a bit more realistic, that they're not just all super best friends from the beginning, that there's some, like, inter-party conflict between this, you know, big group of people from different backgrounds and everything. And it felt less like they're a bunch of non-connected characters who are only really connected via Reen, and instead it's like it's a one big interconnected group, which is cool. The climax of Chapter 4 is definitely the best up to that point in the series, and or not in the series, in the game itself. And honestly, it's one of the better, like, final sections of a chapter, I think, in the game. The way the terrorist attack in the city, like, breaks out out of nowhere is really cool. It feels like you do something really important in terms of rescuing both the, what's her name? I know the Crown Princess's name. Elise, and Elise's friend Oliver's sister's name is, I don't know. It'll come to me in a second. But, like, it feels like you accomplished something really important there. And also, you fight a fucking bone dragon who he's given, like, a little tiny bit of lore by G when he's summoned. But also, you have, like, extra anticipation for the fight because he's featured in the anime opening pretty prominently. So that's really cool. And plus, I mean, he's a bone dragon. That's pretty cool, dude. So overall, Chapter 4 climax, really good. And I even like the way they kind of make the secondary squad, you know, the squad with Lisa in them. It feels like, you know, it's mentioned that they're off doing important stuff too in terms of containing the attack on the city. So it's not just, you know, the main party does something, which is something that, like, it's always a little weird in RPGs where you have, like, this big party, but, like, canonically only, like, 4 characters fight at a time and everyone else is just kind of, like, standing around. So I do think the game does a good job of, like, making it seem like your other characters are doing something. Now, there are some exceptions to that, like, yeah, the final chapter, right, where whoever you don't have in your main party, I guess, is just kind of, like, standing around talking at the entrance while you're fighting the final boss, because of reasons. But I think that's pretty much it for Chapter 4. Moving on to Chapter 5, adding Crow and Milliam as permanent party members is, like, super cool. Both because it's pretty surprising, even though, I mean, yes, you've had Crow and Milliam as playable characters before. I kind of thought it was going to be a situation like Azure, where, like, yeah, they might be party members, but not until the next game, right? I didn't expect to have them added as permanent party members, like, that late into the game, which was really cool and surprising. Big fan. And just, I think they add an interesting dynamics to the party, even though I don't really like Milliam that much as a character based on the first game alone. I mean, people say she gets better, which is definitely possible. I like Crow, but Crow definitely, you know, gets a lot more interesting with the final chapter revelation and everything. But even before that, he's just, you know, he's a fun character. In terms of the location you visit, Legram is probably, I mean, Seldic is probably the worst location you visit in the game, but it's also the first one, so it kind of gets a bit of a pass. Legram, I don't know, it's very simple. It's cool and pretty. I do like the way, you know, the vibe of the town, like, completely changes once the fog is lifted, so it kind of feels different despite being very, like, small scale, which is partially also because you do go to Gorelian Fortress in that chapter as well, so you kind of have, like, 2 locations for that field study, which I think is one of the reasons why Legram feels so like a lot smaller in scope than the other locations. Reen's duel with Victor's really cool, big fan. It's a trope, but I do like the idea of mastering, like, a dangerous power and everything. It's just, you know, it's just one of those things you like. Personal preference and all that. Lohungan Castle's a cool dungeon. You know, big spooky vibe and everything with the whole magic stuff. And the Ariane Road foreshadowing at the end is cool, especially, you know, coming right out of Azure, right? Being able to kind of understand what they're going for there is cool. Aurelia Fortress is, I mean, that's like the meat of Chapter 5. It just doesn't come until, like, the very end. Both cool for both what actually happens in and of itself, but also for the foreshadowing and dramatic tension there because you know what's going to happen, kind of, due to the flash forward from the start of the game. You know, you're just kind of like, the whole time you're waiting for like, okay, you know, what's going to go wrong? How's it going to happen? The only real problem with it is that the climax kind of lacks some interestingness because the Scarlet fight is an absolute joke. Even with the difficulty mod, she's completely, like, what? Also, I do find it a little odd that the entire fortress, which has been hyped up for like 3 games in a row as being like impregnable and like built to withstand an invasion by like an actual standing army, gets taken over by like 12 guys with some robots. Like even with the extra adding of like, okay, so like, yeah, some of the tanks do go haywire and start destroying stuff, but like still, you would think just your regular foot soldiers alone would be enough to not get destroyed by like, it's like maybe 12 guys with some robots, and they take over the entire fortress in like, you know, 30 minutes or something. It's a little weird, but you know, it's kind of one of those things you roll with for the sake of the plot. Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a weird one. It's very slow because you have the whole like class festival stuff at the start, which I wasn't like super enthused with per se. I think it's, I don't know, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the final chapter, but overall the class festival stuff I wasn't like super excited for, I guess, right off the bat. You do have the Sarah duel, which is really cool as like your final practical exam, because it shows, you know, the progress the gang has made, but it also underlines the idea that there's still a lot of growth for them, in the sense that like, yeah, they can kind of fight Sarah 3v1 on somewhat equal ground now, but she still, you know, feels a lot stronger story-wise. And that's one thing that, you know, the difficulty mod, I guess, also underlines as well, by giving her like more than double the HP she normally has. So she's like, you know, feels super hard. So that's another example of, I guess in a way, the game being hard with the difficulty mod does reinforce a lot of the lore fights more, because that's something that you do kind of run into with these games, especially in the past, right? Because in previous games, I mean, there are some like straight up unwinnable fights in this game for like the first time in the series. Previously, there were no such thing as unwinnable fights. You could always win any fight that had an actual gameplay section. You could always win, and you just had like a slightly different scene depending on if you won or lost. But it does feel, I guess, a bit better to have the fights actually feel like they're completely unwinnable than, because I mean, you do run into some situations in previous games. Trying to think, like the probably the biggest egregious one for me was the first Arius fight in Azure, where like just completely fucking mollywopped his ass, and then in the cutscene he's like, "JK, I wasn't really trying. Teleports behind you, nothing personnel, son." It just felt weird, but back to this game. The courageous stuff is really cool because it like both the setup for the future, and it's also nice to kind of get an idea of what the hell Oliver's like been doing this whole time, you know, because I mean they kind of set up this idea that he's gonna come up with his own path for the Empire back in Trails 3, but you never really like learn what the hell he's doing, so it's kind of cool to kind of see what he's been doing off screen this entire time, you know, building up a bit of a relationship with the neutral nobles, and coming up with this plan to have Victor lead the courageous around as like a symbol of de-escalation, so to speak. As for the actual field study itself of Chapter 6, Roar it's okay. It just kind of feels like worse Zeiss. Partially because Zeiss, as I've said many times, it's the city with the best music. But like, Zeiss being the industrial city of Trails in the Sky felt a lot cooler when you first see it, because prior to that you've only ever seen like pretty rural areas. I mean, the closest thing to a city you'd seen prior to that is Rouen, which, I mean, you do have some like kind of technology stuff in terms of the drawbridge, but for the most part it's still just kind of like your standard port city you could see in any sort of like fantasy game without any industrial elements. But so when you go to Zeiss and you see like, you know, the big escalator and everything, it's like cool for the first time, whereas in Cold Steel, Ruhr just feels like small Heimdall with an escalator. Like, it doesn't hit as hard, it being the quote-unquote industrial city. It doesn't really feel all that advanced compared to Heimdall, whereas Zeiss felt a lot more advanced than every other city in Trails in the Sky. The actual mine infiltration, it doesn't feel as cool as the climaxes of Chapter 4 and 5, but the C fight with the difficulty mod was awesome. You know, beating both V and C back to back on the first try is probably like my favorite combat experience in the entire series. The fight against C was, you know, super razor thin. It basically coming down to Elliot not getting petrified by the 40% spell at the end was awesome. Like, or even the fact that we killed C with Elliot's ult by like 300 damage. Like, I think if we did like just slightly less, he wouldn't have died. Which could have run into problems, right? Because he would have been able to maybe like one-shot Elliot, or like, I mean, we still technically always had the one last angel proc, but it was a razor thin fight at the end of the day, and it's probably like definitely my favorite moment in the entire LP, but maybe one of my favorite combat moments in the entire like all the Let's Plays. Moving on to the final chapter, I do really like how the gang's achievements get recognized. You know, you have the idea that they get like personally thanked by the Emperor and everything is cool. It really sucks the Ymir visit couldn't happen on screen. I understand why it was cut, because A, the game do be kind of long, and well, that's mainly it. Game do be kind of long, and plus, you know, you have an issue of scale, right? You know, this isn't like a massive AAA game or nothing. It's, you know, very relatively small budget and everything, very niched down. But I do think there's better locations that could have been cut. Roar, I think, could have been cut. Keldic or Legram, I think, are 3 places that I would have rather visit Ymir than any of those 3. I think honestly Legram in particular could have been cut, because Roar, I mean, I think it being near the mine is important for the plot, you know. Got to pause there for a second. What was I saying? Oh yeah, how Roar it's important for the plot that like it's near the mine and everything, because I think they don't really ever directly state this in the game, but I think it could be implied that like the revelation that the noble faction has been stockpiling iron from the mine secretly is kind of what results in them maybe making their move to take over the capital and everything sooner. Because it's like, well, we've been outed, so we need to make our move before the actual government makes their move. So I think that's important that the Roar stuff happens, even though I don't find that area all that interesting in comparison. But like Legram, you don't really have to go to Legram, because I think the stuff that happens in Legram could easily have happened in Ymir, right? The main important thing that happens in Legram, Green's duel with the Radiant Blade Master, and to a lesser degree going to Lohengrin Castle. But honestly, I think the way you could have done it is have them go to Ymir in Chapter 5, and instead, or you could have just had the idea that Victor is just visiting, and that's why he and Reen duel, because it's kind of implied that Victor does just like fuck off and go do his own thing every once in a while. So that could have been like a good setup for having Reen duel Victor, and teach him, you know, kind of let him learn to somewhat more master his, you know, special state. And it also ties in with the actual plot of what happens in Returning Home, because, I mean, part of what happens in Returning Home is Reen coming to terms with being able to use his special power for good. And so that would line up really well if that were to, say, happen after he did the duel with Victor. So, like, I really think Legram could have been yeeted in favor of Ymir. I mean, going to Lohengrin Castle is, I mean, kind of important, but you do also get some importance. You maybe could have just, like, I don't know. Could have shifted the idea that, like, that seal or whatever that you find in Lohengrin Castle, and maybe you just find it up on the mountains in Ymir or something. Like, I don't know. I would have preferred the first visit to Ymir and, like, seeing Reen's family for the first time for all the characters. Could have happened on screen. I feel like that's more important than what happens in Legram. But, yeah. I think that's it on the Ymir stuff. The school festival, I mean, it's fun, right? I wasn't super interested in the whole concert stuff, but the actual festival itself is a lot of fun. It's nice to see all the detail that goes into the events by actually doing them all this time. You know, I probably did about like maybe a third of all the events in Azure for the intermission chapter. And it's cool to see them all. Like, you know, it adds a lot of not really direct like development, but nice characterization for each of the characters, and there's, you know, some fun little lines of dialogue throughout them all. I do think the game executed the whole festival plotline pretty well, and it does serve as like a good send-off for the idea of the gang being students, since I assume going forward there's going to be a whole lot less school stuff just based on the way the plot goes at the end of the final chapter. I don't really know if we're going to have time to have math class. The schoolhouse being the final dungeon of the game, though, is kind of eh. I will say. It's just, the area isn't super interesting aesthetically. It feels a little too much just like one of the, like a random Trails 3 dungeon. I don't know, there's just not like a big climactic flair to it. It's just kind of like, hey, go to the old schoolhouse and fight a boss because, I don't know, you need to. I don't know, there's just not like a lot of there's not like not a lot of hype or meaning behind going to the old schoolhouse for the final dungeon compared to, you know, some of the other final dungeons in the series, right? Because it's like, oh, we need to go because we won't be able to do our concert. Whereas, like, you know, at the end of Trails 1, it's like, we need to go because the entire country might be fucking destroyed. Who knows? You know, the one in Trails 2, if we don't go, who knows what the hell. And plus, I mean, the library arc is just, like, sweet as hell in Trails 2. Trails 3, I mean, mechanically is the most interesting final dungeon, just because, you know, you get the multiple different parties and everything. Super cool. The final dungeon of Trails 0, I mean, once again, it's like, you're going because you need to face off against the big bad, right? There's, like, a very important reason that you need to go into the Sun Fort. And so it feels cool. Same with the Azure Tree in Trails of Azure, whereas it's like, you go into the final dungeon of Cold Steel because gotta do that concert, man. And I mean, of course, there is the idea that it could be dangerous for the school and everything, but it just doesn't feel as cool. And then the final boss in particular, just, I mean, he's cool in design, but there's no hype or real meaning behind fighting Erebonius, or whatever his name was, the Shadow Lord, as I kept calling him. Yeah, I mean, especially when there's also the implication that it's just a simulation. You're not even really fighting the Shadow Lord or whatever he's supposed to be. I mean, I guess they'll maybe go into more detail on him in future games, but as like, you know, what he represents lore-wise. But yeah, overall, the whole final dungeon, little eh. I enjoyed the Bond events at the end of the concert and the school festival. I mean, basically, this is kind of just this whole section talking about Bond events is a repeat of what I said in Azure. Everything I thought about Azure still stands pretty much, where I'm not super... I don't think Bond events are bad. I think, like, final bonding events. I think the bonding events throughout the main game, where you know, talk to people and get to have little scenes with them, very good. Shouldn't be capped. You should be able to see all of them. That should just be the way it works naturally. I think, but the final capstone Bond events are just, I don't know. It's essentially like my same problem, but especially the romantic ones. I feel like if you're gonna have romance in your game, right, which is fine. I'm not a huge fan of it personally, but if you're gonna do it well, right? And the only way to do that stuff well is to have one canon path that the story is focused around, that the character is written to like the other character, and their relationship is integrated into the story naturally. Other characters react and talk about it. It feels like it's a part of the narrative, like everything else that happens. When you go into this, like, pick a waifu route, so to speak, where, you know, oh, you can pick any character to be your fucking whatever. The relationships just don't feel as strong, because Reen as a character isn't the one picking, you know, say Laura. He's picking Laura to dance with because the player wants him to pick Laura. Reen himself does not show much real affection or feelings for any of the characters in the game, especially on like a romantic sense. It's just all the girls have the hots for Reen because, well, they have to, because they need to be able to be picked to be the waifu at the end of the game. I mean, this is like, I'm being kind of cynical, and this might, I don't know, might piss people off. I don't know. But, I don't know. I don't like it. like you can't have great character moments like you could in, say, Trails in the Sky 2, where, you know, Estelle's relationship with Joshua is very important to the overall plot, and you have like great character moments like when she breaks down on the airship at the start of the game, or when she's playing Joshua's harmonica on the dock and Kevin comes to, you know, talk to her about it, and she breaks down again because that relationship means a lot to her, and the story can actually directly integrate those feelings into it because there's only one canonical love interest there, right? And so it's just like the romance stuff just feels very superficial at the end of the day, and I don't have like a lot of, I mean, granted, it's also because it's like they're going to develop it more across the future games, but I still just don't have a lot of faith in it being like super strong, because instead of writing one potential romantic relationship that could be integrated into the story, you have to juggle, you know, several. And I just don't think it's going to be integrated all that well. Or as well as it could have been if you just picked one of the characters, even a character I didn't like that much. I would much rather it just be like a well-written relationship than one that feels a little tacked on, I guess. And this is all just kind of repeats the stuff I said in Azure, but I know some people didn't watch the Azure Let's Play, like, you know, some new people came in for the Cold Steel stuff, but yeah, just kind of a rehash on that front. The actual climax of the final chapter do be pretty cool. I like the reveal of Crow being C. I thought that was really well done. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of good hints. It kind of walks that good balance in terms of plot twists, where it's like, there's good hints to let you come to the conclusion, but it's not so obvious that it undermines itself as a revelation, because you do kind of have to walk that tightrope where if you don't give the audience enough hints in terms of a plot twist, it feels cheap, but if you give too many hints, then it becomes obvious and there's no impact to it. Now, in some regards, like, Crow being C should be a little odd. It's one of those things where it's like, after it's revealed, you're like, oh, yeah, duh, obviously. I mean, even just, like, you know, his name and starting with a C, right? Personally, I kind of, like, I guess I really fixated on the idea that C wasn't actually his name. It was maybe, like, a title or something, just because I didn't think the game was going to be that direct. I really like the idea of C standing for, like, Count or something, and C being like a disgraced noble or something, which would kind of explain his why he's siding more with the noble faction as opposed to Osborne. Like maybe there's some personal beef with Osborne and the Reformist faction, or something to do with that. But I mean, there's a lot of hints that it's Crow, right? Name, the fact that Crow kind of disappears in Chapter 6. He shows up in Chapter 4 kind of randomly during the Heimdall stuff. He is mentioned to be away and just kind of like fuck off and do his own thing all the time, which kind of fits up with what C is doing. You know, him going off to do C stuff when, you know, it's presented as him just being like a truant, but he's actually off doing evil shit. Well, not really evil shit per se, but, you know, nefarious deeds. Which, you know, is part of the reason why, like, I suspected Nightheart for a little while, because, you know, maybe it's like, oh, well, he's off going to do his army stuff. Actually, he's, you know, going off to cosplay as Darth Vader. Same thing with Rufus, where it's mentioned that Rufus travels around a lot, and he has his own airship and everything. So, and I could see it have been, like, maybe his, you know, title, Rufus, is actually, like, a count or something. You know, because he can't be the Duke, right? Because his dad's still the Duke, but maybe he has, like, a lower nobility title or something until he takes over. So that was, like, some of the reasons, or some of the people I thought C could have been. In terms of the mech stuff, I mean, I mentioned I'm not a huge fan of mech stuff. I just find it's a little overused in anime stuff. You know, suddenly mechs is a very common trope. And I don't mind mech stuff so much when, like, you're clearly told it's going to be a mech story. But, you know, I didn't sign on to the Trail series for it to be a mecha combat stuff, so it turning into that is a little, you know, it's slightly disappointing. It's not like a big deal or nothing, and I will admit the final fight between Rien and Crow is cool in a story sense, even if the fight itself, gameplay-wise, sucks ass. Like, a lot. I hate it. It's also worth noting that I don't hate it because of the difficulty mod. I hate it because the base level design is bad. It sucks even in base level Nightmare, like a lot. Like even playing it on regular Nightmare, I still had to grind, which is really bad because the entire series since the very first game has been built on the idea that you don't need to grind. So having the final fight of the game be like, if you're not at least like level 65, you straight up can't beat this fight, is really lame. Also, I should remember to cut in the footage, because I mentioned this in a comment, and I don't know if people believe me, because it seems like it's an exaggeration, but it's actually true. After well, it was before the final video went up, and I kind of alluded to the idea that the Azure Knight fight was hell, and some people were like, oh man, I can't wait to see how you beat it on the difficulty mod. I felt kind of bad, and I was like, oh man, I gotta beat this, man. So I went and I grinded up. I even used the palms the game gives you, I guess, with you get some of those, what are they called? Shining palm baits that the game gives you for free. And so I was able to get to level 72, go back, install the difficulty mod again, do the fight, still just get fucking smoked. Like I grinded him out for like another hour and couldn't beat him. One attempt, I got 10 morning moon counters in a row. And that should be playing right now, hopefully. Because I actually was recording it. It's 10 in a row. And I still lost. Fight bad. Now, once again, that's with the difficulty mod. But I do think the fight sucks regardless, even in regular Nightmare. But the cliffhanger itself is really cool and compelling. And a lot of people kind of mention it as like, wow, I'm surprised you're able to wait at all because of the cliffhanger. I'm immune to cliffhangers. I waited 6 months to play Trails 2 after Trails 1. And I think the Trails 1 cliffhanger was like even better than the Trails in the Cold Steel cliffhanger. Now, the reason I waited for that long wasn't by choice. It was because basically back when I did the Trails 1 Let's Play, I uploaded videos a lot slower. I only did like, I think I was doing 5 a day at one point, and then I switched to 7 a day to try and, I think I was uploading like 4 Trails videos a week. Compared to, you know, we were doing like 14 a week for Cold Steel. So that Let's Play took a lot longer. Like, even just because I think I beat Trails 1 in like June 1st, and then the final video didn't go up until August. And then after finishing the Let's Play, which at the time was the longest one I'd ever done, I was like, well, I don't want to jump right into Trails 2, especially because the Trails 1 Let's Play, like, literally nobody watched it when it came out. It's only ever had people watch it, like, after the fact. So I didn't want to jump right into Trails 2 because, you know, nobody watched the first game. So, you know, that's always a little discouraging, right? Which is kind of funny to think on now that it's, like, probably the most successful series I have. I mean, technically the Digimon stuff that I occasionally do outperforms it, but that's partially just because of, those were some of the most popular Let's Plays I did, like, many, many years ago when I first started doing, YouTube stuff pre-hiatus, but I kind of got, like, off topic there. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, basically I'm immune to cliffhangers because I waited like 6 months to start Trails 2 after Trails 1. So, you know, waiting 2 weeks or so to start Cold Steel 2 it ain't shit to me, dude. Now I do want to just talk about the difficulty mod a little bit. Let me get some water. Alright, so, and mainly I'm just kind of mentioning this because A, it's probably the most unique aspect of the playthrough because I don't think that many people, you know, played through the first game with the difficulty mod because, I mean, it makes sense. The only reason I played through it is because people who have played the game have, you know, told me that it's easy as shit. But in your first playthrough, especially if it's like your first Trails game as well, the game won't seem that easy because you don't know all the mechanics, right? And the games are very mechanically dense. So, I mean, even just playing on like normal or hard, it's going to seem like pretty difficult just because you don't, you know, you haven't put a couple hundred hours into the series to know pretty much exactly how the combat system works and everything. So, going in, played with the difficulty mod, and honestly, I think it greatly enhanced my enjoyment of the game. Like, I know I enjoyed it more because I have done like a little bit of the game on Nightmare, just base level. You know, I had to do the robot fight several times when I was grinding out the crow fight on regular Nightmare, and the robot fight you do beforehand is so fucking boring. Oh my god, it's so boring. Because it's like the enemy, he does like no damage, he has no speed, like he just like never attacks. You get like 8 attacks every time like each character gets to go like 2 or 3 times before the robot gets to go once, and you just like pop S breaks and you do like dumb amounts of damage. It's just not very interesting. And then also I revisited the Shadow Lord final boss just to see what was different between the difficulty mod version and the regular version. And the difficulty mod version is like so much better because the regular Shadow Lord boss fight, he has a 50% resistance to stat down and an 80% resistance to blind. So really the only way you can survive his super attack on Nightmare is to use Craft Guard or Insight spam. But you have extra options with the difficulty mod because you can lower his strength pretty consistently, and it's a lot easier to blind him to cause him to miss his attack, which is cool. So like I think that fight is just straight up better designed with the difficulty mod, just as an example, because it's not all just stat boosts. A lot of your status effect stuff is tweaked as well. Now that stuff is harder to see, especially for a blind playthrough where I haven't played the original game or the original version, and not everything's listed in the changelog. Like, you know, specific like tweaks to abilities are mentioned, but like actually what bosses are changed and stuff is not mentioned in the changelog. So that's something that, like, you know, I wasn't super aware of, but I did revisit some of the fights just to see how different they were on regular Nightmare. And honestly, I think all the fights on with the difficulty mod were kind of better, for the most part, with the exception of the actual, you know, final Azure Knight fight, which is just bad, full stop. But yeah, so going into, you know, my mindset for using the difficulty mod, like originally I kind of intended to play through Cold Steel 1, just base level Nightmare, because I was asked about the difficulty mod back during the Zero Let's Play, before I played Azure. And at the time I was like, okay, you know, I'll play through Cold Steel 1 normally, and then for 2 and 3 and onward, we'll play with the difficulty mods probably. Just depending on how easy Cold Steel 1 is. But then I played Azure, and Azure was like a face stomp. Like, it was just a face roll. I never really had to think all that much for the most part. Outside of, like, really the only fight I ever had to, like, super think hard on was the Sigmund fight. And to a lesser degree, Aryan Road. Partially just because I really, really wanted to beat her on my first try. Just because I've been talking shit about how we were going to beat her ass for the entire game. So, I definitely had to win on the first try, because actually I refought that fight. I think I mentioned this in the Let's Play, but I tried to see if I could get Tio's Bond event like in game by going back and doing some combo crafts before you unlock her Bond event, which required refighting Aryan Road, and I beat her in like 10 minutes barely paying attention while watching something on YouTube. So I'm like, okay, actually that fight's a joke. As long as you just keep Tio ulting, you literally can't die. Forgot what I was gonna say. But yeah, basically, Azure was very easy as a result, or it was easy as someone who, you know, knows the combat mechanics at this point, which is why I think it's so funny when people, like, you know, I would get, like, toxic comments talking about how bad I was in Trails 1, and it's like, you're talking from a position of authority. Of course, you know, it's gonna seem like I'm bad when I don't know the mechanics, and the game has a god-awful tutorial. The tutorial amounts to, hey, read this book. You're like, I don't really want to, like, read 20 different pages to know how to play the game. Can you just tell me? Nope, shut up. But yeah, basically, you know, I did the difficulty mod because the Trails games have like just amazing combat mechanics. Like the combat system itself is very, very good. It's kind of like all the best parts of, say, like a turn-based system, like say Final Fantasy X, which is a combat system that a lot of people really like. But you have the extra addition of the mobility aspect, which is really cool, and you don't see that many standard turn-based JRPGs utilize mobility and positioning and maneuvering in their combat systems, so that's really cool to see in the Trails games, and it's probably one of the most unique aspects, that kind of mixing of standard JRPG combat with also the importance of positioning and maneuvering you see in something like a tactical RPG. But the problem the series has consistently had is not the greatest balance decisions, in both directions. Sometimes shit is like unbelievably overpowered in like the enemy's favor, and then sometimes you have stuff that's like, how the hell did this get through? Why would you give us this? This is so strong. You mean I can make myself immune to all attacks? What? That's insane, dude. Or like even just like base level Chrono Burst, where you can like literally go infinite on some characters because you can just keep going over and 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 over again. Because you get so many EP items that you never have to worry about mana. But yeah, having to come up with like different strategies for each particular fight was a ton of fun, and being able to just engage with the mechanics and not have to handicap myself. I mean, I handicapped myself a little bit. You know, we never used adamantine shield, and we didn't use delay quartz because adamantine shield is just like a fundamentally broken concept that I don't think can be balanced. And the delay, apparently, just due to some weird interactions, it just works in a way that doesn't make any sense, where basically every proc of every like point of delay procs independently. So if you have like a bunch of different delay quartzes, you can like kind of stun like enemies infinitely, because each individual quartz will roll against their delay, their AT resist. So, which I don't think is the way it's supposed to work. So I kind of never really engaged with that. But like some of my favorite fights, I mean, the sea fight was amazing because of playing with the difficulty mod. And just some of the more interesting strategies, like going pseudo infinite on the Shadow Lord with Machias and everything, was cool. The ghost fight with Millium, coming up with the strategy of using force to continually wipe all of his spawns and have a way to easily free people from his entrapment, is cool. Another thing that was fun about the playthrough from a gameplay aspect was not grinding at all. So basically I was like in poor for the entire game. So you had like a lot of interesting decisions constantly about like what master quartz do I level. I can really only level 1 per character because we're not grinding. So you kind of have to make your decision. Like it's really important which one you decide to level. And in some regards, that paid off really big. Like, you know, leveling Angel, for example, and Angel ended up being the most overpowered master quartz in the game. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I just think it kind of cool to revive. I didn't realize it was going to be broken to shit at max level, so that was really rewarding to have that decision from the beginning of the game to level it pay off. Compared to, you know, just like, oh, well, it's grinding it out like over and over to level up all of them. And also just like decisions on how to spend my money, right? Like we ran into some problems with status effect bosses because I did not have the money to buy status equipment, which was kind of fun in a way because you had to come up with different ways to beat bosses. Like, for example, the ghost strat or the ghost fight in chapter 5 with Millium. I only had to come up with that strategy because I couldn't just equip green pendulums on everyone because I did not have the money to buy them for everyone. And then also, plus there's the extra aspect of you don't know that fight's gonna spam Nightmare and Petrify until you do the fight, so you wouldn't really naturally think to buy a bunch of green pendulums because, you know, you don't expect them to spam status effects. And by the time you learn that, you don't have access to buying items anymore. You'd have to reload a save. But yeah, the whole like not grinding and actually having money be like a real thing you have to think about is a lot of fun. And I think just the enhanced combat fun, like, I mean, I went from kind of like not really dreading combat, but like in Azure, I was not looking forward to it because it was boring. It wasn't really that fun. The only real enjoyment I had in Azure from combat was just trying not to die. You know, like the jokes about it being a permadeath playthrough at some points. But even that kind of got a little boring towards the end of the Let's Play. Once I died a couple times and there wasn't like that level of let's try and beat the game without ever dying. But yeah, I think my enjoyment of the game is like higher. Like if I played the game without the difficulty mod, it would probably be my least favorite game of the series, with the exception of Trails 1, which Trails 1 you can't rank. Trails 1 is grandfathered in because it lays the foundation for every future game, so it's not fair to rank it. But like honestly, I think without the difficulty mod, I probably like Trails 3 and 0 more, but with the difficulty mod, I think I like it. I think I had more fun playing it because with the difficulty mod than I did playing Trails 3 and 0. Now, do I think Cold Steel is better than them? That's hard. I definitely think it's worse than Trails 2 and Azure, which, I mean, once again, is to be expected, right? It's the start of a new arc. Things are going to be slower. Really, the only fair comparison you can make between it and the other games is it and 0. I don't know. Do I think Cold Steel is better than 0? It's hard. I mean, they're different in a lot of ways, right? Like Cold Steel takes the approach of having like a really large cast of characters, whereas I mean, 0 takes, you know, just 4 characters and really fleshes them out. I don't know, man. It's a hard one. They're very close. I mean, all the games are amazing. So it's one of those things where I kind of hate ranking them because it makes it... Because if you say, like, oh, it's the worst of the series, that sounds bad. But it's like, the game's still very, 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 very good. But yeah, I don't know. I think I definitely had more fun with the difficulty mod playing through them than I did 0 and Trails 3. And Trails 3 is kind of a weird one to rank because it's like, as a whole package, it's not that strong because there's a lot of like boring shit, but there's some super high highs and that's what you remember. So it's like my perception of the game is kind of warped with time because it's like I only remember the good shit and I don't remember the boring stuff, like how the first 5 chapters have no plot. I don't know, but like that, the rough ranking of enjoyment is probably like Trails 2, Azure, Cold Steel with difficulty mod, Trails 0, Trails 3. Then, yeah, I think that would be it. And then Trails 1 you don't rank because it's not fair, because it doesn't have the benefit of the foundation that Trails 2 or Trails 1 laid for the rest of the series. So we're at about an hour, which I wanted to keep this under an hour, but we'll be ending in probably about 5 minutes. Just a few little final... I guess one more thing to kind of mention, right? Because we will be playing with the difficulty mod for 2 and 3. I don't think there's one for 4. At least as of recording this, I don't, because I mean 4 is still somewhat new. I think it's about like a year old since it's a little bit older than that if you count the Japanese release. But I think it's been out in English for about a year now. I don't know if there's a difficulty mod for it or not, but so depending on how fast we get to that, we might just play that like regular vanilla and face roll the game, which might be a nice change of pace after grinding through 2 and through the difficulty mod. But like, just another thing to mention is that like, I think some of the reason I kind of want to talk about the difficulty mod at length is I feel like some people got the idea that like I disliked the game more because I played with the difficulty mod, which is just not true. And I can understand why you could come to that conclusion because I complain a lot, and that's just me, dude. Vocally complaining is just a thing I do a lot when doing commentary. It's a way to control salt, mainly. And I kind of, I guess, come from the era of internet humor where like rage and being like righteously indignatiously mad at stuff was very funny. Like I guess I have a lot of influence from that, like, you know, kind of mid to late 2000s era of internet humor. So like being justifiably angry at something that's kind of bullshit is something that I guess I'm influenced by. So you see that a lot in my commentary when it comes to like annoying stuff, where I'm more likely to kind of like complain and make a big deal out of it, when really, like, even fights that like annoyed the piss out of me in the moment, like say the the ghost fight in chapter 5, like I actually really like that fight now. I think it's super cool. It's one of those things where it's like, as soon as you beat something that's annoying, you kind of forget about all the annoying parts and you just remember how fun it was to actually overcome the obstacle. So at the end of the day, I would always rather a fight be difficult and kind of annoy me a little bit in the moment than it be just like face roll easy that I don't even like have to think about it. So overall, difficulty mod, good. Few small problems, but overall very good. Moving forward, CS2 LP should start probably, my loose plan. This video is being recorded on the 10th of September, Friday. It will probably be uploaded Sunday. I would like to start recording CS2 Monday or Tuesday, and then have the first video go up Wednesday. So Wednesday the 15th, it's a little bit later than I wanted, but this video just kind of got procrastinated on because like I just haven't been able to record as much, and I needed to build up a backlog for Danganronpa mainly, because I really want to finish that Let's Play before I start CS2, just so I can fully devote myself to CS2. But I still probably have to do like 5 more videos of Danganronpa 3 before I'm done with it. So I'll probably try and finish that Monday. Then Tuesday start CS2. Hopefully Wednesday or Thursday at the latest have the first 2 videos go up. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, if you guys have a few like general things, anything I should know before starting CS2 can be commented on this video. Just don't spoil anything at all. Nothing, no, like only vague stuff if I ask for it, right? Like, even, like, just, you know, be very careful when it comes to, this is something that, like, I kind of have to reiterate, especially after I had, like, some major spoilers in the Danganronpa Let's Play. Now that was different. That was, like, someone specifically trying to, like, ruin the Let's Play. But, like, just don't, be very careful when it comes to commenting vague stuff, or even just, like, what you comment about. Like, I'm actually very attentive to, stuff, and I can remember comments for a long time. So, even just, like, if you ever, like, don't ever say stuff like, oh, you should remember this in the future, or things like that, because that's kind of, like, vague, minor spoilers. Just, you know, just a kind of little general reminder. I know, no, I've never had a comment on a Trails video specifically trying to spoil stuff. It's just situations where people maybe, don't really think of something as being a spoiler, or underestimate, I guess, my ability to connect the dots, so to speak. If that makes any sense. So, you know, just be a little careful when it comes to describing stuff in the future, or alluding to things about that might happen in the future, things like that. Just because, I mean, the videos and the Let's Play as a whole will be better for me and for everyone watching the more blind I can stay, right? I think that's it. That wasn't really a planned spiel. That just kind of, like, just popped into my head for some reason. I guess I do have, like, one general question to ask. How the hell does save importation work for CS2 if I plan on doing it as a NG Plus playthrough? Like, from the start, so that we have unlimited bond events and we can see the special cutscene at the end, maybe? Which, I mean, I know I can just look it up on YouTube, but it'll be more interesting to be able to do it, like, in the moment. And to kind of, plus I've heard there's other stuff as well besides just the super special final cutscene of Doom. But yeah, like, would I even be able to use my saves from this Let's Play? Or do I just, like, download a save with the specific Bond event we picked? Is that all that really matters? Like, I don't really exactly know how, save importation works for a New Game Plus playthrough in that regard, but, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Overall, CS Cold Steel, very good. Ton of fun. Enjoyed the Let's Play. I'm really happy to see, like, even more new people come on board as I make my way through this series. It's been kind of, like, crazy to see, like, an actual small community of the same individuals commenting on each video. It's been very flattering, especially considering I can upload, like, 2 hours of content a day and know that people will actually watch it. Is kind of awesome, and makes the whole YouTube grind these last few years feel worth it. Grind's not really the right word, because, I mean, I do genuinely derive a lot of enjoyment. Even Let's Plays that nobody watches, I still have a lot of fun making the videos and everything. But I think that's going to be it for this video. Like I said, I didn't want to make it too long, and there was a lot of extra rambling about nonsense in it. But yeah, Cold Steel 2, within a few days. Anything important I need to know that can be said with no/very minimal spoilers is appreciated. Explain to me how the hell save importation works, and then we're golden. I'm Extra Cheese 87. Stay tuned for CS2, and bye, guys.